A quiet Texas street turned into a live courtroom when two imposters in tactical vests tried to detain the wrong man, an FBI agent they never should have crossed. It was a calm Saturday morning in Plano, Texas, the kind where kids pedaled bikes through cul-de-sacs and sprinklers ticked across manicured lawns. Reginald Carter stepped out of his two-story brick home with nothing more on his mind than hauling the trash to the curb. He barely made it 10 steps before spotting three figures waiting at the edge of his driveway. Two men in black, community enforcement, stitched across their mismatched vests. And between them, Linda Whitfield, the sharp-tongued HOA president, arms folded, lips pressed tight. Reginald slowed, the trash bag dangling in his grip, his eyes narrowing. From a distance, a nervous neighbor might have mistaken the men for real officers. But Reginald noticed the details: vests that didn't quite fit, Velcro straps hanging loose, boots scuffed like they'd been bought secondhand. Their posture was stiff, rehearsed, all wrong. "Mr. Carter," Linda started, her tone clipped, as if she practiced this speech in the mirror. "We need to talk." Reginald set the trash down slowly, resting his hands on his hips. "About what?" The taller man stepped forward, pale, shaved head, mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Community enforcement," he said flatly. "You're in violation of neighborhood regulations. We're here to detain you until police arrive." Reginald's brows lifted, the corner of his mouth twitching in disbelief. "Detain me?" Linda crossed her arms tighter. "You've ignored repeated notices, and this has gone too far. We can't have anyone undermining our community rules. These men are here to make sure you comply." Reginald studied them in silence, his gaze steady, sharp. "And what exactly are the charges?" The shorter one, broad-shouldered, beard unkempt, pulled a folded paper from his vest and read it like an arrest warrant. "Property violations. Non-compliance with HOA orders. Unauthorized modifications to your driveway. Loud gatherings." The list goes on. Reginald almost laughed. "So let me get this straight. You think that gives you the right to step on my property and, what was it? Detain me?" The tall one's jaw flexed. "That's right. You can come peacefully, or we can make this harder." For a moment, the air went still. The neighborhood itself seemed to pause, listening. From a few houses down, a curtain twitched. Another followed. Reginald knew the pattern. Eyes behind blinds, phones ready to record. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Let me explain something to you. There's no such thing as community enforcement. You're not law enforcement. You have no authority here. And you're trespassing." Linda's cheeks flushed red. "Don't talk to me about authority, Reginald. You think you're above the rules because of who you are. We've had real complaints, and I won't sit by while this neighborhood falls apart." The bearded man shifted his weight, uneasy. The tall one didn't flinch, his hand hovering just above his belt, like he wanted Reginald to believe he was armed. Reginald tilted his head, gaze sharp, reading them like a file. Wannabes. The kind of men who thought a vest and a stern face made them untouchable. What they didn't know was that he wasn't just a homeowner. He was a federal agent, trained to dismantle organized crews and stare down men far more dangerous than these clowns. But he didn't show it. Instead, he smiled. "You picked the wrong driveway today." Linda stepped closer, her voice rising, almost shrill. "Don't test me, Reginald. These men can hold you until police arrive. And when they do, you'll be the one answering questions." That's when Reginald let the trash bag drop. It hit the concrete with a heavy thud, the bottom splitting just enough to send a soda can rolling down the driveway. The metallic clatter echoed through the still morning air. It wasn't the sound of surrender. It was the sound of a man planting his feet. Windows filled with faces. Across the street, a teenager raised his phone, camera flashing red. This was no longer a quiet HOA dispute. It was turning into a neighborhood spectacle. The tall man stepped forward, boots grinding against the concrete, mirrored shades reflecting Reginald's steady, unshaken expression. Inside, though, the imposter was itching to prove himself. Sir, don't make this difficult. He barked, voice rigid. You're being non-compliant. That means we have the right to escalate. Reginald's lips curled into something close to a smirk. Escalate? You're standing on my property with no badge, no authority, and no idea how deep in trouble you already are. You've got 30 seconds to back off before you regret this stunt. Reginald warned, voice steady and sharp. Linda snapped her head toward him, her words dripping with irritation. You think threats are going to make this better? You've ignored letters, warnings, fines. The HOA exists to keep this neighborhood safe and respectable. People like... She stopped mid-sentence, lips tightening as if she'd caught herself. Reginald's eyes narrowed. People like me, huh? Careful how you finish that thought, Linda. The bearded man stepped in, trying to seize control. Look, this doesn't need to get ugly. Just come with us, wait for the officers, clear it up. Maybe they'll go easy on you. Officers? Reginald's tone was flat, almost mocking. You mean the actual police? Or the fake badges you two ordered online? The tall one stiffened. His partner glanced at Linda, uneasy. But Linda, desperate to hold her ground, pressed forward. These men are authorized by the HOA board to ensure compliance. We don't have to answer to you. Reginald chuckled softly and shook his head. Linda, listen to yourself. You dragged two grown men in bargain bin tactical gear onto my driveway. You really think that's how the law works? By now, the audience was growing. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open, and neighbors stepped onto porches, phones raised like witnesses in a courtroom. Reginald dropped his voice, low and controlled, just loud enough for the imposters and the neighborhood to hear. You want to know what real authority looks like? It's training. It's law. It's accountability. And I promise you, real cops are going to be very interested in this little performance. The bearded man swallowed hard, his bravado slipping. The tall one doubled down, stepping in until he was inches away. I'm not playing. You're in violation. Resist, and we'll restrain you. Don't test me. Reginald didn't move. Instead, he leaned in slightly, voice calm but cutting. Son, I dealt with cartel enforcers less reckless than you. Do yourself a favor and back up, before this turns into something you can't walk away from. For the first time, doubt flickered in the man's eyes. Linda barked, her tone rising with desperation. Why should the rest of us live by the rules while you do whatever you want? We have a system, Reginald. We have order. And if you won't respect it, maybe you don't belong here at all. Reginald's gaze locked on hers, cold and steady. Respect isn't forced with fake cops and threats, Linda. It's earned. And right now, this isn't about rules, it's about control. The words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, her confidence faltered. She folded her arms tighter across her chest, masking the crack. The bearded man shifted nervously. Maybe we should wait in the street, he muttered. But the tall one shot him a glare. No. We're not leaving. Reginald exhaled slowly, eyes sharp, reading every tell. He dealt with men like this before, men who mistook fear for respect, and he knew exactly how to dismantle them without throwing a single punch. Tell me something, Linda, he said evenly, turning his attention back to her. When you called these two clowns, did you think it through? Because when the real police show up, and they're on their way, they're not going to ask me the hard questions. They're going to ask you why you thought you had the authority to stage an arrest. Linda blinked, color draining from her cheeks. From across the street, a voice rang out. Leave him alone! The words carried down the block, slicing through the tension. What had started as an HOA stunt was now a neighborhood standoff. Reginald kept his eyes on the men in front of him, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. This is your last chance. Walk away now, before the whole block watches you hauled off in handcuffs. The bearded man's resolve cracked, his face twitched. But the tall one clenched his fists, clinging to the illusion of control. Around them, the neighborhood had come alive. Curtains no longer twitched, they were thrown open. Doors swung wide. People leaned over porch rails, phones capturing every second. Across the street, the Hendersons stood shoulder to shoulder on their porch. "Never seen anything like this," Mr. Henderson muttered. "What's she thinking, bringing fake cops into this neighborhood? I told you Linda would go too far one day," his wife whispered back. Reginald caught fragments of their words but stayed focused. His trained mind cataloged every detail: the sloppy gear, the tall man's nervous glances down the street for backup that wasn't coming, the restless twitch in the bearded one's hands. Then Marcus Johnson, the neighborhood teen, raised his phone high and shouted from the sidewalk. "Yo, Mr. Carter, I got you on live. Thousands are watching." The tall imposter snapped his head toward him. "Put that down," he barked, stepping toward the boy. Wrong move. Reginald shifted instantly, body cutting between the man and the teen. His voice turned cold and sharp. "You even think about touching that kid, and this ends right here." The imposter froze, finally realizing the man in front of him wasn't intimidated at all. Linda, flustered and losing ground, tried to rally. "This is a neighborhood matter. None of you should be interfering." Her words only poured gasoline on the fire. "Neighborhood matter? Looks like harassment to me," a woman shouted, a baby perched on her hip. More voices followed. "This is wrong. You can't arrest your neighbor for cutting his grass too short." The tide had turned. What was meant to scare Reginald had flipped. The enforcers were the ones on trial now, judged by every pair of eyes on the block. Reginald let the silence settle, heavy and sharp. "Linda," he said, his voice carrying like a verdict. "Do you hear them? This isn't order. This is chaos. And you created it." Her jaw tightened, but her voice trembled. "You're twisting this, Reginald. You've always been a problem. Always bending the rules. Ignoring the standards we worked so hard to build." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "No, Linda. The problem is that you confuse control with leadership. They're not the same thing." That line cut through the crowd like a gavel. Neighbors nodded. Murmurs rippled. Phones stayed trained on the scene, capturing every angle. The bearded imposter wiped sweat from his brow, unraveling. "Look, man," he muttered. "Maybe we should just go. This isn't worth it." But the tall one hissed. "No. We finished this." He squared his shoulders, trying to look bigger than he was. "Last warning. You either come with us peacefully, or we'll use force." Reginald almost laughed. "You really want to do this? In front of every witness on this street? With a dozen cameras pointed at you? Go ahead. Show the world who you really are." The tall man faltered, eyes darting between the glowing phone screens and the rising murmurs. He could feel the weight of the crowd closing in. Linda, desperate, shouted again. "Don't listen to him. He's manipulating you. He thinks because of his job." "Careful, Linda." Reginald cut in, voice quiet but sharp as glass. The street fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down like a judge's gavel. He turned back to the imposters, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "Listen carefully. You've got two choices. Leave quietly and pray the cops don't charge you with impersonation. Or keep pretending you've got power and let this entire street watch you get dismantled in real time." The bearded man's eyes darted to Linda. She gave a tiny shake of her head, clinging to her illusion of control. But the illusion was gone. Across the street, Marcus shouted, "They're done, Mr. Carter. We all see it." The crowd erupted, voices rising, the tide of public judgment crashing over the imposters. And Reginald? He didn't have to move. He didn't have to shout. The neighborhood had already chosen its side. Reginald stayed perfectly still, letting the neighborhood itself become his ally. He didn't need to flex or shout. The truth was already exposing them, one camera angle at a time. The block had become a stage, every porch a witness, every phone a lens of judgment. The imposters fidgeted under the weight of 100 unseen eyes. For a fleeting second, it looked like they might fold. The bearded one's stance screamed retreat, his feet edging toward the street. But the tall one, shaved head, mirrored shades, refused to back down. In a sudden, defiant motion, he yanked a pair of metal handcuffs from his vest. The sharp clank of steel sliced through the chatter. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, neighbors flinching as if they'd felt the cold bite of those cuffs themselves. "You're under neighborhood arrest," the tall man barked, his voice cracking just enough to betray the bravado he was clinging to. "Don't make me put these on you the hard way." Reginald's eyes tracked the cuffs, then locked on the man's face. When he spoke, his tone was low, deliberate, surgical. "Take one more step toward me with those cuffs," he said, "and you're committing a felony, impersonating an officer, attempted unlawful restraint. That's prison time, not community service." The man's grip tightened, but his confidence faltered. The bearded partner leaned in, his whisper harsh and desperate. "Eddie, this is crazy. We can't cuff him, we'll get locked up." "Shut up," Eddie snapped, his voice cracking across the driveway. Linda tried to salvage what was left of the illusion. She raised her chin, projecting for the neighbors. "Don't let him scare you. This is a law-abiding community, and we have every right to enforce standards. He's just trying to bully his way out." But her words fell flat. From every porch, murmurs of disapproval rolled like thunder. "You don't have the right, Linda!" someone shouted. "This isn't enforcement, it's harassment," yelled another. Reginald leaned in, his voice soft but sharp enough to cut. "I've seen real cuffs. I've used real cuffs. And I know when a man is bluffing. Drop them now, before this turns into something you'll never walk away from." Eddie's jaw clenched, pride warring with the reality closing in around him. His partner tugged at his sleeve, voice shaking. "Come on, man. Cameras are rolling. We'll get fried for this." But Eddie shoved him back. "I said I've got this." He lunged a step forward, thrusting the cuffs like a weapon. The crowd recoiled in unison. Someone screamed, "Call the cops!" Dozens of phones tilted, recording every frame of the unraveling. Reginald didn't flinch, didn't step back. He squared his shoulders, his voice calm, steady, final. "You're one heartbeat away from destroying your life. Think hard before you take that step." For the first time, Eddie hesitated. Sweat gathered on his brow, glinting in the Texas sun. His hand trembled, just enough for everyone to see. The facade of authority he'd been clinging to cracked like glass under pressure. Linda, desperate to salvage control, shouted, "Do it! Don't let him intimidate you. Put him in cuffs. Show the neighborhood who's in charge." The words backfired instantly. A man 3 houses down barked back. "Linda, you've lost your mind. You're not the police." More voices followed, sharp and angry, the tide turning fully against her. Reginald seized the moment. His voice rose just enough to carry, calm, controlled, commanding. "Everyone here sees what's happening. This isn't about rules. This isn't about violations. This is about power, fake power. And these men are being pushed by someone who doesn't know the law, doesn't respect the law, and thinks intimidation is leadership." The bearded man dropped his gaze, shame washing over him. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered. Eddie shot him a glare, then glanced at Linda, torn between pride and fear. But before he could decide, Reginald stepped in, closing the space between them, eyes locked like a predator sizing his target. His voice dropped to that quiet, professional register that carried more weight than a shout ever could. "You lay one finger on me," he said evenly, "and the real police won't even need to ask who you are. I'll walk them through every single mistake you've made in the last 10 minutes. You think you're intimidating me, son? I dismantle men like you for a living." The words hit like a hammer. Eddie froze. His arm locked midair, the cuffs dangling uselessly at his side. The crowd rumbled, not cheers, but a deep, collective approval. "He's right. Leave him alone. You're done." The street had chosen its side. Reginald straightened, his posture calm but unyielding, his voice steady and final. "Here's the truth. This is the end of your game. You don't have authority. You don't have power. And the longer you stand here pretending you do, the deeper the hole you're digging, the harder it is to climb out," Reginald said evenly. Eddie's shoulders sagged, his grip loosening on the cuffs. The bearded man, Sean, took another step back, visibly unraveling. Linda, though, looked ready to explode. Her face flushed crimson, her voice breaking into a shriek. "You don't belong here. You never have. That's why you're fighting so hard." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. The neighbors' murmurs sharpened into outrage. "That's enough, Linda!" someone yelled. "You're exposing yourself!" shouted another. Reginald stayed composed, though her words cut deeper than he let on. He looked at her for a long, steady moment, disappointment flickering in his eyes. Then, turning back to Eddie and Sean, his voice carried calm authority. "Take my advice. Walk away now. Because the next chapter of this story? It doesn't end with you walking home. It ends with flashing lights, handcuffs, and charges you won't be able to explain away." But Linda wasn't ready to quit, and her desperation was pushing the imposters closer to the edge. The standoff simmered at a boil. Eddie still clutched the handcuffs like a lifeline, his arm trembling midair. Sean looked ready to bolt. And Linda stood at the center, red-faced and trembling with rage, barking orders no one seemed willing to follow. Reginald let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable, then broke it, his tone calm, but sharp enough to slice through the heavy air. "Eddie. Sean. Let me ask you something simple. Do you even know what happens to a man who impersonates a federal officer? Forget state charges. Forget HOA bylaws. I'm talking federal law. Do you know the minimum sentence?" Eddie blinked behind his mirrored shades. His mouth opened, then closed. 3 years, Reginald said. "That's minimum, if you're lucky. Touch me, escalate this, and now we're talking assault. False imprisonment. Conspiracy. Do the math." Sean's eyes widened, the fight draining out of him. "Linda," he muttered, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "He's not joking. Don't listen to him," Linda snapped, voice cracking. "He's bluffing. He just wants you scared so you back down." Reginald's gaze shifted to her, calm but cutting. "You've already lost, Linda. The crowd knows it. Your neighbors know it. And deep down, so do you." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the street. A woman holding a toddler muttered, "He's right. This is insane." Eddie's hand finally dropped. The cuffs hung uselessly at his side like dead weight. But Reginald wasn't finished. He stepped closer, closing the distance, his voice low and sharp, the voice of a man who'd stared down cartel lieutenants and never flinched. "You know what separates real authority from fake authority?" he asked, eyes cutting from Eddie to Sean, then to Linda. "Accountability. Real officers answer to the law. Fake ones? They answer to their pride. And pride will get you killed, or locked up." The line hit Eddie like a gut punch. Sweat rolled down his temple. "This community," Reginald continued, his voice carrying so every camera could catch it, "deserves better than fear tactics. They deserve honesty. They deserve leaders who solve problems with respect, not intimidation." Linda let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Respect? Don't lecture me about respect. Do you know how many hours I've poured into this neighborhood? How many complaints I've had to field? People want order, Reginald. They want someone to keep things proper. Order doesn't come from force," Reginald replied evenly. "It comes from trust. And trust disappears the second you bring in imposters with fake vests to threaten your neighbors." Eddie swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe he's right, Linda. Maybe we should just go." "No," Linda barked, spinning toward him. "If we walk away now, we lose everything. Everyone sees this. They'll think I can't handle my job. Do you want that?" Sean had finally had enough. "You think this is about your reputation?" he snapped, voice loud enough to carry down the block. "I'm not going to jail for you, Linda. I didn't sign up for this mess." With one sharp motion, he ripped the Velcro patch from his vest and tossed it to the pavement. The cheap fabric fluttered against the driveway like a confession. Gasps rippled through the neighborhood. Phones zoomed in. The illusion was shattering piece by piece. Reginald's gaze shifted to Eddie. "That's one down," he said evenly. "What about you?" Eddie's hands trembled. The cuffs rattled softly against his thigh. For the first time, the bravado cracked enough to show the scared man behind the mirrored shades. "Think carefully," Reginald pressed, voice dropping low, almost intimate. "Linda won't be there when the police start asking questions. She won't sit beside you in the courtroom. She won't do your time. She'll save herself, and you'll be left alone to face it all. You'll be the one wearing real cuffs." The street went still. Eddie's grip loosened, the cuffs slipping from his hand and clattering onto the pavement. The metallic echo rang louder than Linda's voice. "No!" she shrieked, her face flushed, her foot stomping like a child denied candy. "Pick them up! Don't let him win!" But Eddie didn't move. His chest heaved with the weight of what he'd done, pride buckling under the weight of reality. Reginald straightened, his eyes locking on Linda with calm precision. "Leadership isn't about control, Linda," he said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "It's about responsibility. And you've failed yours." A tide of voices rose around them, sharp and unanimous. "He's right. She's gone too far. We don't want this here anymore." Linda froze, the authority she'd clung to crumbling in real time, slipping through her fingers faster than she could grab hold. Reginald bent, picked up the fallen cuffs, and held them high so the crowd could see. "This," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "is what happens when you confuse control with justice, when you mistake fear for respect. But this isn't justice. It's fraud." The cuffs gleamed in the sun, a quiet symbol of the lie unraveling before the entire neighborhood. For a heartbeat, everything was still. And then Eddie snapped. Sweat streaked down his temple as he lunged forward, shoving past Sean in a last, reckless bid to reclaim what little pride he had left. The crowd gasped in unison. Phones tilted to capture every frame. "Don't touch him!" someone screamed. But Eddie didn't hear them, or didn't care. His hand shot for Reginald's wrist. And that was his final mistake. In one seamless motion, Reginald's training took over. He pivoted, seized Eddie's arm, and twisted it behind his back in a precise, controlled hold. The cuffs that had fallen moments earlier now snapped around Eddie's own wrists, locking tight. Eddie collapsed to his knees, the shock in his eyes louder than any cry. The crowd roared, half disbelief, half awe. "Did you see that?" someone shouted. "He didn't even fight, just moved." Another breathed. Reginald didn't gloat. Didn't raise his voice. He simply held Eddie steady, his tone calm, professional, almost detached. "You're done. Don't resist. It'll only make it worse." Linda's voice cracked with disbelief. "You can't arrest him." Reginald's gaze cut to her, cold and sharp. "You're right. I can't. But I can detain him for impersonating an officer until the real law enforcement arrives. And considering he just tried to assault me on my own property, the charges are stacking fast." The neighborhood erupted again, voices sharp and accusatory, this time aimed squarely at Linda. "You set this up. You pushed them too far. This is on you, Linda." Sean had already stripped off his vest, retreating toward the curb, his hands raised. "I'm out. I'm done," he muttered, his voice cracking. "I didn't sign up for this. Lady, you never told us he was law enforcement." Reginald's tone stayed calm, almost surgical. "That's because she didn't know." Linda's face paled. "What are you talking about?" Reginald reached into his back pocket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. With practiced ease, he flipped it open and held it high enough for every phone to see. The gold badge caught the sunlight, gleaming like a verdict. "I'm Special Agent Reginald Carter," he said, voice clear and level. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The street went dead quiet. Leaves rustled. Eddie's ragged breathing filled the silence. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson clutched her husband's arm. I knew he carried himself different, she whispered. From the sidewalk, Marcus shouted, his phone still streaming. No way! FBI! He's FBI! Every camera caught it, the badge, the authority in his voice, and the look on Linda's face as the truth finally hit home. Reginald's eyes stayed locked on her. You came onto my property with imposters, Linda. You endangered your neighbors because you thought intimidation would give you control. But you didn't do your homework. You had no idea who you were dealing with. Her lips trembled. She tried to rally. This is abuse of power. Abuse of power? Reginald cut in, his voice like steel. That's rich coming from the woman who staged a fake arrest over an HOA dispute. What I'm doing is lawful. What you did is criminal. The crowd murmured again, the sound sharper now, the disgust in their voices unmistakable. Phones rolled. Evidence stacked. And for the first time, Linda Whitfield looked truly powerless. The older officer stepped closer, his hand out. Let me see your credentials, sir. Reginald nodded once, calm and deliberate. He reached into his pocket, produced his ID, and handed it over. The officer studied it, his expression shifting from suspicion to quiet respect, and maybe even relief. All right, the officer said firmly. You're good. We'll take him from here. The crowd broke into murmurs, a strange mix of relief, shock, and quiet excitement. Phones tilted in unison as two officers lifted Eddie to his feet, cuffed hands behind his back, and guided him toward the squad car. Linda's voice cracked, sharp and desperate. Wait, no! He's not the criminal here. Reginald is. He's twisting everything. You have to believe me. A younger officer with sharp eyes stepped toward her, voice clipped but steady. Ma'am, we've got multiple witnesses, and from what we're seeing, this looks very bad for you. Did you authorize these men to act as law enforcement? Linda's mouth opened, but nothing came out. From the crowd came a rising wave of voices. She brought them here. She told them to arrest him. We saw everything. The younger officer's tone hardened. Ma'am, step aside. If you interfere again, we'll treat it as obstruction. Linda's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her. The authority she'd once wielded over this street meant nothing now under the glare of flashing red and blue. Reginald stayed composed, a steady presence near his steps as Eddie was loaded into the back seat of the patrol car. Off to the side, Sean raised his hands nervously, his voice shaking. I didn't touch anybody. I swear. I'm done. I just want to go home. One officer approached him. We'll need your statement. Don't move. The neighborhood buzzed with disbelief, some neighbors whispering, others quietly cheering, children clinging to their parents as they realized what they'd just witnessed, that fake authority could be exposed. Reginald finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying across the stunned street. This is why you don't let fear dictate your choices. Real authority doesn't hide behind fake vests and intimidation. Real authority serves. It protects. And it answers to the truth. The younger officer cast a quick look his way, her expression softening with something close to admiration before turning back to her work. Linda, though, wasn't done. She shouted one last, broken plea. You think you've won, Reginald, but people like you don't belong in neighborhoods like this. Gasps cut through the crowd like a knife. That's enough, Linda, someone shouted. You've lost every ounce of respect, another neighbor snapped. Reginald didn't flinch. He only looked at her with quiet, devastating disappointment. You just told everyone exactly who you are, he said evenly. And that'll stay with you a lot longer than anything I could ever say. Phones caught her collapse in real time. Neighbors turned away, some shaking their heads, others muttering under their breath. The once proud HOA president now stood small and exposed, her power stripped away. But the fallout had only begun. By the time both patrol cars were parked and Eddie sat cuffed in the back of one, the neighborhood had transformed into a courtroom. Neighbors clustered near the ends of their driveways, whispering, pointing, recording, their voices a mix of disbelief and grim satisfaction. Officer Ramirez, the broad-shouldered man who checked Reginald's ID, conferred quietly with his partner, Officer Green. Every so often, their eyes flicked toward Linda, who paced the curb like a caged animal, muttering under her breath. Reginald stayed still near his steps, hands clasped loosely behind his back, the calm in his posture radiating more authority than Linda's frantic pacing ever could. Finally, Ramirez walked over. "Agent Carter," he said, his tone steady but respectful. "We've confirmed your credentials with dispatch. From what we see, you handled this by the book." Reginald gave a slight nod. "My goal was to keep it from escalating. He came at me with cuffs. I had no choice but to detain him until you arrived." Ramirez exhaled, glancing toward the patrol car where Eddie sat. "The good news? It's all on tape, neighbors' videos, our body cams. It's a solid case: impersonation, unlawful restraint, trespassing, conspiracy. The DA will sort the charges." Reginald's gaze shifted to Linda, who froze under his eyes. "Don't forget instigation," he said evenly. Ramirez followed his line of sight and nodded. "Oh, we won't. Green, bring her over here." The crowd murmured, the energy rising again. Officer Green approached Linda. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." Linda lifted her chin, trying to summon her old confidence. "This is a misunderstanding. I was maintaining community standards. That's my job. I didn't commit a crime." Green's tone stayed professional but unyielding. "Ma'am, your job doesn't include authorizing private citizens to impersonate law enforcement. We'll need you to come downtown and provide a statement." Gasps rippled through the neighborhood. "They're taking her in," someone whispered. "About time," another muttered. Linda's composure cracked, her voice rising. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." Reginald's voice cut through her outburst, calm but final. "That title doesn't put you above the law. If anything, it means you should have known better." Phones zoomed in as her face crumbled. Green's hand rested gently but firmly on her arm, guiding her toward the squad car. Linda resisted, but the officer's grip didn't waver. She didn't have a choice anymore. Sean, still hovering near the curb, looked pale as he spoke up. "Am I going to jail too?" Ramirez turned to him, voice even. "We'll need a full statement from you. Depending on what you did, or didn't do, that'll decide if charges stick." Sean nodded mutely, his earlier bravado gone, replaced by fear and shame. And with that, the neighborhood, once a quiet street, had become the stage of a reckoning no one would ever forget. "The best thing you can do," Officer Ramirez said evenly, "is cooperate." Sean nodded quickly, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything. I didn't want this to go this far." Ramirez gave a curt nod and motioned for another officer to escort Sean aside. Reginald exhaled slowly, some of the tension finally leaving his shoulders. Around him, the neighborhood murmured, a swirl of awe, relief, and quiet admiration. A few neighbors clapped softly. One man called out, "You handled that better than anyone else could have." Reginald didn't acknowledge the applause. His focus stayed on the officers. "What happens next?" he asked. Ramirez answered plainly, his tone steady but respectful. "We'll book Eddie and Linda, take their statements, and file charges. Sean's involvement depends on what he admits. After that, it's up to the courts. You'll likely be called to testify." Reginald nodded. "That's fine," he said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd of stunned neighbors. "The important thing is this street is safe again." Officer Green stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know, Agent Carter, we don't usually walk into scenes where the suspect's already cuffed and under control. You made our job a lot easier tonight." Reginald's tone stayed professional, but there was a quiet edge of weariness in his words. "I didn't want blood on anyone's hands. That's always the goal, control without chaos." But even he couldn't ignore the irony. The neighborhood might have been quiet again, but peace was a long way off. For years, Linda had ruled with an iron fist disguised as community standards. Tonight, That illusion had shattered in front of everyone. Across the street, the Hendersons whispered to each other as the patrol cars idled, red and blue lights painting the brick homes in a surreal glow. "He's not just a neighbor anymore," Mrs. Henderson said softly. Her husband nodded. "People are going to remember this." When the squad cars finally pulled away, one carrying Eddie, the other Linda, the neighbors lingered. Some whispered. Others just stared. No one could quite believe what they'd witnessed. Reginald stayed still, silent, his gaze fixed on the departing cars. He hadn't asked for this. But he knew the fallout was only beginning. By the next morning, Plano felt like it was living under a microscope. The flashing lights might have faded, but the tension lingered. Clips of the standoff flooded Facebook groups, Nextdoor threads, and local news broadcasts. By Saturday night, one headline ran on a Dallas station. HOA president detained after confrontation with FBI agent neighbor. For residents who had quietly resented Linda's iron grip, it felt like vindication. From her porch the next morning, Mrs. Henderson waved across the street. "You did this community a service, Agent Carter. Don't you forget it." Not everyone was so vocal, but the look said enough. Some neighbors met his eyes with gratitude. Others with unease. After all, no one had expected the polite man mowing his lawn to be an FBI agent capable of dismantling chaos with surgical precision. Linda's house sat dark. Blinds drawn. Her car gone. By Tuesday, the HOA board sent out a careful, sanitized email. "The association will be conducting a special meeting to address recent events and determine next steps in leadership." Everyone knew what that meant. Linda was finished. Eddie's mugshot appeared on every local outlet, along with a list of petty charges: disorderly conduct, unpaid fines, minor thefts. Nothing about him had ever suggested authority. Everything about him screamed desperation. Sean, meanwhile, cooperated fully. In his statement, he admitted Linda had promised community enforcement pay, stoke their egos, and told them the neighborhood needed strong men to keep people like Reginald in line. That revelation disgusted the neighbors. In quiet conversations over hedges and mailboxes, the truth poured out. Linda had been complaining about Reginald for months, using careful, coded language to frame him as a problem. By Wednesday, a group of residents gathered in the community park for an informal meeting. Reginald hadn't planned to join, but on his evening jog, they waved him over. "Agent Carter," one man called, his tone respectful. "We just want to thank you. What you did, it showed us what was really going on." Reginald slowed, catching his breath, shaking his head. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said quietly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. I live here too. My family lives here. I wasn't going to let intimidation run this street." A woman holding her daughter's hand stepped forward. "But it's bigger than that," she said. "You showed us fear only works if we let it. Linda's been making people feel small for years. No one pushed back until you." Reginald's gaze softened. He crouched so he was eye level with the girl. "That's the lesson you need to remember," he said gently. "Bullies get power when good people stay quiet. But when you stand your ground, when you speak the truth, fear loses its grip." The girl smiled shyly and squeezed her mother's hand. By Friday, the story had gone national. A morning news show replayed the now viral clip of Reginald calmly flashing his badge, the headline scrolling in bold across the screen. "FBI agent confronts HOA president in Texas standoff." The neighborhood would never be the same, and neither would Reginald. Clips of Reginald holding Eddie restrained played on a loop across news channels, the anchor calling it a moment where truth cut through false authority. But Reginald never leaned into the fame. When a reporter showed up at his doorstep for a comment, he simply shook his head. "This isn't about me," he said quietly. "It's about accountability." Behind the cameras, though, the weight of it lingered. For years, his work with the Bureau had been about dismantling dangerous networks, men with real power, organizations built on fear. Yet here, on his own street, he'd faced something just as corrosive: misused power dressed up as leadership. At the next HOA meeting, the board voted unanimously to remove Linda from her position. Her chair sat empty, a silent monument to how far she had fallen. A quieter, humbler neighbor was chosen as president, someone who promised transparency and collaboration. Still, the wound lingered. The neighborhood wasn't going to forget the day its leader tried to weaponize fear. Parents discussed it with their kids. Teachers at the local elementary school even used it in class, a real-world example of honesty, responsibility, and standing up to intimidation. For Reginald, the fallout wasn't about Linda's humiliation, it was about the conversations that followed. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before were suddenly talking, about what community really meant, about the kind of leadership they wanted, about why accountability mattered. One evening, as he watered his lawn, Marcus, the teenager who had live-streamed it all, approached him, his usual swagger replaced by quiet respect. "Mr. Carter," he said, almost shy. "That video's at 1 million views now. People keep saying you're a hero." Reginald gave a faint smile. "I'm not a hero, Marcus. I'm just a man who refused to be bullied." Marcus tilted his head, thoughtful. "Yeah, but you showed us all how to do it." Reginald glanced down the street. Kids riding bikes again, neighbors chatting on porches. The block wasn't perfect, but it felt lighter now. Freer. "Maybe that's the real win," he said quietly. By Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after the confrontation, the street had settled. The air was calm, lawns freshly cut, kids racing bikes without parents peeking through blinds. Still, every glance at his driveway carried the memory of that day, the place where truth stood taller than intimidation. Reginald kept his routine simple. Morning coffee in hand, leaning against the porch railing, he'd watch the neighborhood wake up. He hadn't sought out attention, but the neighborhood gave it anyway. Quiet waves from passing cars, nods from people who'd never spoken to him before, silent acknowledgments that something had changed. But Reginald didn't bask in it. He wasn't wired that way. For him, the victory wasn't in the headlines or the viral clips, it was in the quiet, steady return of peace. What weighed on Reginald's mind wasn't pride, it was the lesson he hoped his community would carry forward. That afternoon, the HOA board called a special neighborhood meeting in the community park. Word spread fast, and by evening nearly every household was represented. Families sat in folding chairs while children ran across the grass, the air buzzing with quiet anticipation. When Reginald arrived, conversations hushed. He hadn't come as an official speaker, just as a neighbor, but Harold Jennings, the soft-spoken man newly appointed as interim president, asked him to say a few words. At first, Reginald hesitated, but then he stepped forward. His voice wasn't loud, yet the entire crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. "Last week," he began, "we all saw what happens when authority is faked, when power is used to intimidate instead of protect. And the truth is, it could have gone very differently. Someone could have been hurt. Kids were watching. Phones were recording. Lives could have been ruined far worse than they already were." His gaze swept the crowd, some faces solemn, others ashamed, many simply listening. "What I want you to take away from that moment isn't about me, and it isn't about the FBI. It's about the kind of neighborhood we want to live in. Do we want fear to govern our streets? Or do we want respect and accountability?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Reginald continued, "Leadership isn't about control, it's about service. And service means putting people first, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one gives you credit. That's the difference between authority and arrogance." From the back, Mrs. Henderson raised her hand, her voice steady despite her years. "Agent Carter, what should we do if something like this ever happens again?" Reginald didn't hesitate. "Stand together. Speak up. Don't let fear isolate you. The only reason those imposters had any chance at all was because they thought this neighborhood would stay silent. Silence is what bullies feed on. But when you speak truth, when you shine light on lies, the game ends." Applause spread slowly, then swelled as the message sank in. Parents nodded and whispered to their children. Teenagers, including Marcus, filmed from the back, capturing every word for another live stream. Reginald caught the boy's eye. "You keep posting those videos, young man," he said with a faint smile. "But make sure they're not just about drama. Use your platform to spread truth, to show people what accountability looks like." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, grinning. "That's the plan." As the gathering wound down, people lingered, talking to one another more than they had in years. Strangers introduced themselves, shaking hands, asking about families. The tension that had long defined the neighborhood seemed to dissolve into something new: connection. Later that evening, Reginald returned home. The sun dipped low, casting a golden light across the quiet block. He paused at the end of his driveway, the same spot where everything had unfolded just days before. The memory of Eddie's cuffs clattering on the pavement, Linda's shouts, and the flashing red and blue lights was still vivid. But now that space meant something else, a turning point. And as he stood there, he thought of his years in the bureau, of countless briefings on dangerous networks built on fear, and how, sometimes, the fight for truth began not in distant cities but right at your own front door. Reginald thought of the dangerous missions, of the nights he'd stared into the eyes of men who lived and thrived on fear and power. And it struck him, sometimes the battles that mattered most weren't fought in foreign cities or shadowed alleys. They were fought right at home, on the quiet streets where children played and families built their lives. He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. "The truth always comes to light." The sound of children laughing down the block pulled him from his thoughts. A faint smile crossed his face as he picked up the empty trash can by the curb and carried it back to the garage, a quiet reminder that life was moving forward, and that was the point. For those who had watched the standoff unfold, the lesson was clear: real power doesn't come from titles, intimidation, or fear. It comes from honesty, accountability, and the courage to stand firm when it matters most. And if you're hearing this story now, ask yourself, in your own community, in your own life, are you building with fear or with respect? Are you staying silent or speaking the truth when it's hardest? That's the choice each of us faces, whether we wear a badge or not. And if this story resonates, let it be more than just a headline or a video. Let it be a reminder that the fight for justice doesn't always happen in courtrooms or far-off places. Sometimes it happens right where we live,